We're going to be debunking some Medicare myths on this week's episode of Dollars and Cents. Plus, we're going to talk a little bit about one of the tough situations that people unfortunately find themselves in these days, and that is the D word, divorce. 40 to 50% of first marriages now end in divorce, so that can certainly have a major financial impact. We're going to talk about some of the things you need to be on the lookout for and how to best navigate that tough situation so it doesn't impact too dramatically your overall finances. So welcome on into the program. This is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. One of Central Florida's longest running radio programs, also a top 25 financial planning podcast. To learn more about us, go to our website at nelsonfinancialplanning.com. My name, of course, is Joel Garris, certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary. Joining me on this week's episode of Dollars and Cents, a longtime fellow certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, Rob Field. Good morning. How are you?
Morning, Joel. Doing well. Always enjoy getting a chance to do the radio show with you and talk about some of these great topics with our clients.
We enjoy
and future prospects.
Yeah, we enjoy having you immensely on the program. We got a loaded show, that is for sure, on a couple of topics that hopefully will be interesting for our listening audience. But before we get to that, I guess we got to talk about the Fed and the headlines of this past week. Obviously, on Wednesday of this past week, the Fed decided to lower interest rates by a quarter of a point, putting the federal funds rate in a range of 4 to 4.25. Obviously, if you've read the headlines, you know that reaction was sort of a response to some of the weaker labor market data, some rising inflation, and with it signaled perhaps some more rate cuts to come between now and the end of the year. I guess going into 2026, Rob, you could see that Fed funds rate down around 3.5 if what they think they are going to do actually comes to fruition.
Sure. I mean, that's exactly what, that is the potential, right? I mean, so the Fed's decision to cut the rates, it was aimed at addressing that dual mandate of maintaining the price stability, sort of help control inflation, and also maximizing employment. That labor market has shown signs of distress. Job creations are kind of slowing significantly. Unemployment rate has risen to 4.3%. That's the highest level since 2021. Rate cut is seen as kind of a risk management cut. That's how they're going to give it as the definition. And they just want to support the labor market while they keep an eye on inflation. The decision was also influenced by external factors, such as these tariffs that have been on the news, and then just the overall global economic uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of the two-headed monster that the Fed always kind of aims to try and fight. That dual mandate, if you will, of maximizing employment, minimizing inflation. Those are two tough economic terms. I guess the big impact of the headlines is that there's always some level of uncertainty. There's always shifting rates, if you will. Certainly when you look at the Fed fund rates over the past 50 years, we've seen it in the early 80s be as high as 20%, right? I mean, you didn't want to be buying a house back in those days, and then a period of time where the rates were incredibly low. And that would be sort of after the financial crisis in 2008. Of course, COVID also dipped it. And what's interesting is current rate at 4.25. People say, oh, well, that's high with the perspective of where those rates were back, kind of post 2008 and 2020, but certainly lower than those peaks that we saw in the 80s, that's for sure.
Right. Well, according to the data from Macro Trends, the average federal funds rate over the past 50 years is approximately 4.61%. So today's rate is slightly lower, but not too far off from what the longer term, average might be. That makes this rate, I suppose, somewhat normal.
Sure.
And we're slightly below normal on a historical basis.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. If the rate over the past 50 years on average has been 4.6 and you're 4 to 4.25, yeah, you're kind of on the lower side, especially because by the end of the year, you could certainly start to see those rates get down to maybe 3.5. Then, you start to say, well, wait a minute, now you're kind of lower than what we've been historically. And mortgage rates have certainly adjusted. I think I saw a stat where this past week, 30-year fixed rate mortgage dipped down to like 6.1%, which was sort of the lowest in 3 years. So I guess the bigger issue, so that's the good news when they cut rates, right? Is the mortgage rates, things like that go down. But the bigger issue is what to do with all that cash, right? $7 trillion sitting in cash today. These money market rates are going to go in lockstep. And my goodness, that's where I think you got to open up the conversation and think a little bit more about what might some options be. We actually had a conversation this past week with a client who was kind of struggling with that and what to do with a high level on that cash side. And I think that's where you start to engage in this conversation about sort of these tax-free muni bonds, which is not necessarily an asset class that you hear much about except during times like this.
Right. So now they're kind of popping up and people are talking a little bit more about them. The beauty of those is that interest is federally tax-free. Plus, the current yields are pretty close on a muni bond to what the money markets are paying. And so, I imagine there'll be some shifts as we get closer to the year. You'll probably see a very similar number interest rate wise on money markets and muni bond funds.
Yeah, it's interesting when those kind of those yield curves start to intersect when you're looking at those rates. I mean, the chief thing, and this was something that the individual brought up this past week that we were talking to, the interest that he was making on his money market. He's like, wait a minute, I got to pay taxes on that. My tax bill went up, and I'm like, well, the good news is a tax-free muni. That'll be better. Because that is the part that is sort of federally tax-free is the interest that you make on that. And when you think about the category, to your point, Rob, your short-term, your limited-term bond funds are current yield about 2.6 to 2.7. So that general tax-free bond fund is probably around 3.5% today, so comparable to kind of what you would get in a money market, particularly probably next week once the Federal Reserve rate cut comes into play.
Right.
And then a high yield muni probably around 4.1. So you got different types of munis that are paying different interest rates, all on a tax-free basis.
Right, but it is important to remember using the tax-free muni bonds or muni bonds inside of a mutual fund. It's good for after-tax dollars.
Fair point. Yes.
Because you're not going to see that inside of an IRA because it's already, anything comes out of the IRA is going to be 100% taxable. So, there's no reason to plug it in there. But outside in your brokerage accounts, your non-retirement accounts, if you're looking at something where a money market might be appropriate, a money market or a muni bond type money market might really even be appropriate at this time.
Really key distinction there, Rob, because if you put a muni bond fund inside of an IRA, then you don't get the tax-free treatment of the interest because the IRA's rules trump, and ultimately every dollar you take out is going to be taxed as ordinary income. So, how many times have we seen that in our career where somebody's had a muni bond fund inside of an IRA, or they come to the office, they say, here's my current portfolio with firm XYZ, and we take a look at it and we're like, that's interesting.
Right, I've seen that a few times, and I get their thought process. They're, hey, look, that you're telling me that everything comes out of the IRA is 100% taxable. So if I buy this muni bond, which I won't have to pay as much in taxes, isn't that better? And the answer is not. It's two different rules.
Yes, that is for sure. And the other thing to remember is that these are in fact bond funds, right? And there is a risk of principal fluctuation, particularly during periods where rates shift higher, right? Big year where we saw a significant shift was the year 2022. And these funds all lost money. Even the short or limited category was down 3 to 5%. That's principal. The general category down 8 to 10. Some of the higher yield where you're going to find like California, Illinois, those types of states in there, more risk, higher yield, down 12, 13%. That's significant.
Right, yeah, and some of those numbers were even worse in 2008. That general category you're describing had a similar decline as 2022. No big deal there. But higher yield munis, a little more volatile, they experience an equity kind of decline at about a 20% rate. That's
Pretty
a
significant.
big decrease.
Big decrease. So bottom line, if you hear about this conversation about tax-free munis, it's worth having the conversation. It's worth having the discussion. But make sure you are careful about which tax-free muni bond you wind up owning, because there is principal risk. And the more yield you chase, the greater the principal risk of decline on those types of funds. We're going to take a break here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris, Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning. My name is Joel Garris. With me this week is Rob Field. Welcome back to the program, Rob. Always a pleasure to have you here.
I always enjoy doing the show. It's a lot of fun.
Very good indeed. Well, we have a less than fun topic for our listeners in this segment. We're going to talk a little bit about the D word, divorce.
Correct. We're going to talk a little bit about the financial side that's associated when you're going through divorce. And what we're going to kind of touch upon is, divorce can be expensive as you're going through the process. And then once you're divorced, there's a lot of common mistakes people make. It also create even a larger financial issue.
No, that's exactly right. And certainly the impact of the change that makes in your life, your location, family dynamics, finances, all of that, can really be an issue. And unfortunately, divorce, pretty commonplace in today's society. 40-50% of something like that of first marriages wind up in divorce. A lot of reasons, right, where that can happen.
Right. So, everybody hears about the problems that come up when you're going through a divorce. Major changes in your life, location where you live, the family dynamics. And as much as everybody tries to fight for the best financial outcome during the divorce, it can sometimes be the post-divorce issues that cause the most havoc, especially on the finance side. When we look at the reasons that people get divorced, the top one's always infidelity, and then another one that pops up is they got married too young, and those kind of make sense. The third, and it makes up about 50% of divorces, is financial issues. Yeah. And that's just typical getting married, and then things do change. So, as people go through life, their wants change, desires are going to change, their goals are going to change, and their financial concerns are going to change. Sure. And so, you get one spouse as they're married who might be okay with spending, while the other spouse says, I really need to, it's really important that we start saving for retirement. You get one spouse who's not worried about debt, thinks about they'll take care of that at a later date. You get another spouse who says, look, we can have zero debt. Let's kind of live within our means right now. And so as you're married and you go through and you get older, these goals continue to change. And sometimes we're not on the same page. If they're not heading in the same direction and finances come up to be an issue, then sometimes they find that the only answer is to start seeking a divorce. And I've experienced that. Other people I've spoken to have experienced that. And it's funny how we'll see people who are married for 20, 30, 40 years, and then they just get to a point where they've made that decision.
Well, and statistically, that age group where you would say, oh, you made it 25 years, you made it 30 years, you made it 35, you're there for the long haul. But, Rob, as you just described, we do see that where, if you've got spouses that are not on the same page in terms of spending habits or in terms of kind of how they want the money spent or debt, that can get to be a real issue then once you kind of start to get serious about retirement. Because, it's one thing, maybe if both people are working, right, you can kind of sweep a lot of stuff under the rug because money's coming in. But if you're retired, well, then there's a set amount of money coming in, and then that's where you might very well uncover a lot of issues. And certainly we see that all the time, unfortunately, at the office. So the purpose of this segment is to kind of really talk through some of those kinds of issues and just kind of make sure that people are planning appropriately. Certainly not here to give marital advice by any stretch, but that's probably a different radio show, right? Not this one. But at the end of the day, what I always say is it's the fastest way to lose 50% of your money.
Right. We're not going to give marital advice, but we have clients that go through a divorce, and so we certainly want them or prospects or anybody that's listening to the show to understand some things that that can happen, kind of pitfalls. And so we're going to kind of just run through 5 common mistakes we see occur during the divorce and then after the divorce. The first one we see is spending too big. I mean, that's kind of, you would think that would be obvious, and yet it just catches people off guard. A lot of times somebody goes through a divorce and they go through kind of a rebound effect. They're like, well, maybe I'm going to get a new car, some fancier clothes, I'm going to take some trips. And then they get this large settlement and they can do it, except that settlement is sometimes supposed to last a lot longer than just the first year in which you're blowing through a bunch of money and stuff like that.
The whole concept of I'm gonna show my ex how good I could be. I'm gonna get a nice car. Maybe I'll even get some cosmetic surgery. Why not throw that in there too?
We see that,
and that all costs money.
Right, and it's the thing is that rebound, that quick thought where somebody may need a new car. Sure, if you were sharing a car, or it's time to get a car because you've now gotten divorced, both parents have to be able to kind of move the kids around. So they're like, yeah, I'm going to get a car. But you got to think about the car payment, insuring the car, maintenance of the car. So going out and buying a $100,000 car isn't just going to be a simple, I buy the car. You got to maintain it and keep it going. It's got to be the right kind of car for the new lifestyle. Housing, we always see this. Got 2 people, they live in one house. Comes time, they split up. One person may stay in the house, the other person moves out. They're like, okay, I'll just get a house. How much? And they might not even really realize the mortgage, the insurance, the property tax, the upkeep. It adds up. It's always higher than they expect.
Everything's doubled.
Right.
I mean, when it comes down to you're breaking one house into 2, everything is doubled, and those numbers can add up pretty significantly.
Right. And we'll also sometimes see people make a large purchase right before they get divorced. They're like, okay, I'm gonna spend a bunch of this money, and then when we divorce, I'll have the car, the motorcycle, the bike, whatever it is I bought. Then they come to find out during the divorce proceeding that the divisible assets are viewed in whole. And so, if you bought it and spent it, it's still subjected to being divided up.
Right. And that kind of gets us to sort of another issue, which is, make sure that you are looking at all of the assets, because some of the assets might kind of be hidden or might be a little bit difficult to kind of put your finger at, if you will.
Correct. That's the second mistake, is people don't keep up with the assets until it's too late.
Yeah.
And if it gets hidden, you might not be aware of it. So at some point you want to think, okay, are there some accounts out there in which I'm not listed on? Do they have a bank account? Does the other spouse have a business maybe they're running I'm not aware of? Do they have some investments that they've been throwing money into over a period of time that I'm not aware of? And so you kind of keep track of that. A lot of times you'll see people trying to give away assets, like, I'll give it to you, and then when the dust settles, you'll give it back to me. But that also gets tracked. And so, sometimes you got to address all that before the divorce to make sure that you're not caught off guard. If needed, you can hire a private investigator. There are forensic accountants who kind of go back and look at your books. And you just want to make, as you mentioned, the hidden assets can come back to haunt you on both sides.
Well, and if you're having to hire a private investigator or a forensic accountant, then that leads directly into problem number 3, doesn't it? Because those guys are not cheap.
No, not at all. And so a lot of times you bring up a great point. You hire a lawyer or an accountant, whatever it is, and then you become their friend, because you're like, well, this person's going to take care of me. They'll give me advice. And of course, these guys are charging by the hour. So the more time you spend with them and they're holding your hand, that's not really helping you. You really want your lawyer to be your lawyer and kind of be a third-party buffer in between you and the spouse, and make sure all the conversations are business-like.
Yeah, I've seen lawyers just spin wheels in these divorces, and then just the bills are just unbelievable. I remember one time, and this was a few years ago, Rob, where I actually was they were spinning the wheels so much that I was actually called to testify at the divorce hearing to explain just like fundamentals about, well, yes, this is an IRA account, that's an account that you're going to need a special quadro in order to divide up. I mean, the amount of time and to go into court and to have a formal hearing, you have to have some level of practicality when it comes to as you're thinking through this.
Right. You want to avoid the emotional side. You got to think about child custody, but you do have to keep it black and white and kind of keep it business-like. Stand up for what's yours, but don't let your emotions or these ability to fight to suddenly lengthen the divorce and double, triple the cost.
Well, and I think that's where we kind of get to the key takeaways for this segment is you got to be careful that you're not going to spend too much. Got to understand your numbers. It always comes back to that, right? The budget. You do a number of shows there. You talk about budget, Rob. That is a big part of how you best address the divorce situation. And then try and act with your head, not your heart. Is probably a good suggestion as well.
Definitely.
We're going to take a break and continue after these messages here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris and Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning. On this segment, we're going to talk a little bit, Rob, about there's a lot of myths when it comes to Medicare. We run into this, boy, I mean, if not every day, certainly every couple of days where there's just this misconception on some of the things that you can have that are normal with Medicare. And Rob, as our sort of resident National Social Security advisor at Nelson Financial Planning, you kind of help us tackle these issues for clients on a regular basis.
Right. It's becoming a growing conversation. I think Social Security is in the news, and so we get more and more people asking about it. And when I studied and became certified in it, I knew the basics, but it just continues to grow, and the questions get deeper and deeper. And then the same website that's you're using for Social Security is also the same place you go for Medicare, and at some point your Medicare premium may be coming out of your Social Security payment. So we've just spent more and more time trying to keep up with it, and it changes. Every year the rules change. There's plenty of mention of it in the news. So, I try to keep up with the best I can. As you've mentioned before, we're not selling medical insurance, but we certainly can advise and help coordinate. First of all, the big difference between Social Security is money's coming to you, and you can start at 62, wait till age 70. But with Medicare, it's kind of a little more black and white. It's at age 65 is when it starts, and depending on your job and things like that, it determines whether you got to start right then and there. And then once you decide to start, then you got to see what all your options are and what's best for you. And so we hope to kind of tackle some of that today.
Sure. And to that point, I mean, there's some real consequences. I mean, with Social Security, you get a range, right? You can take it starting at 62, as late as 70. Okay, fine. If you miss it by a few months, well, you're going to get a little bit more money. So no big deal. With Medicare, though, you've really got that age. And so that's where a lot of these conversations kind of get into is sort of that general, some good solid general advice regarding Medicare, and of course with open enrollment starting in like 30 days from now on October 15th, and appropriately enough, good topic for today's show.
Right. I mean, the process of signing up for Medicare, it's a lot more rigid than if you're signing up for Social Security. And as you mentioned, if you decide, I'm going to wait a while on Social Security, there's no penalty by waiting. Social Security would be happy for you to delay taking their money. But on Medicare, it's the opposite. There's things and consequences you want to be aware of on those deadlines. Since we know that, Medicare, it's going to play, it's going to affect 70 million Americans or more. So that's a lot of people who need to really be paying attention to what their options are and make sure they don't miss any penalties. And we got a lot of misinformation going around. It's one of the reasons that we talk a lot about this is that we'll have clients and prospects come in and they'll say, well, I heard this podcast and they said this. My neighbor told me this, and I read an article and it said this. And they're not the same across the board. And anybody can make up what they think is correct. And so we're trying to avoid the myths that are floating around.
Well, and I think that's the key part of it is, look, there's multiple layers to this onion, and I think that's sort of where the confusion begins. So, Rob, help us break down sort of just Medicare 101, the different parts that exist out there.
Right. I mean, so the first confusion that people always have is that, Medicare is free. They think, okay, Part A may be, but the other parts are not. So you need to understand that there is a cost built in at some point. Part A covers hospitalization, and it's not that it's free, but that's what you've been paying for throughout all the years you work, you or your spouse, and as long as you've been doing that for 10 years or longer, then when it comes time and you turn age 65, you will then qualify for Medicare Part A. You'll get your Medicare card, and there'll be no additional cost for that. But you do have to have the doctor services, which is referred to as Part B. You've got to have that in some form or fashion. It's either going to be something that if you have it through work, that's fine until you're not working. Then you got to jump on the bandwagon and get Part B through Medicare. It's about $185 a month. That's the base that covers doctors. But regular Medicare, it's an 80-20 split. So now you got to think about, well, I got 20% of my costs. If they're high, how am I going to sort of offset that? That's where the Medicare supplements come in. Those can be $200, $300 a month more above the $185. And then there's another myth about Medicare that that all you need is just regular Medicare, which that's A, and then yes, you could pay for the B, but then you'd have that Medigap that's in between, and then you haven't addressed the hearing, the vision, and the dental. So, on Part B, you want to keep in mind that it's 185, could be higher, also based on your income. Right. Then there's Part D, and this is kind of the new one that popped around in 2003. It's the voluntary prescription drug plan that you can get. So, prescription drugs are sometimes the largest cost of medical expenses that people have. So you need to be able to address that at some point or another. And that's going to be another $47. So these numbers start adding up.
They do.
Medicare is definitely not free.
If I'm adding these numbers in my head, Rob, you're talking about $500 roughly per person for those premium amounts. So retired couple, it's probably close to $1,000. And I think you mentioned this a little bit, but I want to further outline it. The income adjustment that can happen, IRMA, the income adjustment that can happen that increases your cost of Medicare. If you're above certain income thresholds, you ain't going to pay $185 for your Medicare Part B. You're going to pay, maybe it's $230, maybe it's $300. In some cases, $400 or $500, depending upon what your income is.
Correct. That's that income-related monthly adjustment amount that has been popping up because people are like, well, wait a second, they're charging me a whole lot more than $185. What they're doing is they're saying, okay, single person around $100,000, a married couple $200,000. If you're above that, they're going to bump up that $185. And what also throws people for a loop is that they're looking at what you made a couple of years back.
Yeah. That's always the confusing part. Yeah. It's not what you're making now.
Right.
Like for 2026, when you get the letter in January, they're going to be looking at 24's tax return.
Right. So you get a lot of people, they retired this year, and they're like, this year I'm not making very much money, and yet I'm having an income-related monthly adjustment amount applied to my Part B. You can fight it, but that's just the rule. They go back 2 years. Right. Give it a couple of years, it'll fall off.
There is a form, though, I think it's SS44, that you can file, that you can say, hey, wait a minute, I retired, and clients have been having a little bit more success of late at fighting that IRMA adjustment than, say, for example, 3 or 4 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, no one ever kind of won on that one. But we've seen where there has, so it's worth doing if you find yourself in that position.
Right. It's just a standard form. We can help you find it. You fill it out. You give your reason. You turn it in. We've had some people who've had some success.
Right. And then so we talked about A and B and D. Well, there's a C as well, isn't there, thrown in there?
Correct. A is hospital, B is doctor, D is prescription drugs. Or if you look at the Medicare Advantage side, where you're going to now take kind of an outside carrier, they call that Part C. And Part C is actually A plus B plus D all combined. And then your 185 is then channeled to the carrier that's giving you the Medicare Advantage plan. And sometimes you get some other bells and whistles that you would not or could not get through a traditional Medicare plan or Medicare supplement plan.
But the difference with Medicare Advantage is that serves really as more, and I always get confused, PPO, HMO. It's the gatekeeper version of that.
Correct. Right. The thing that everybody likes about Medicare is that everybody takes it. You just walk into the doctor. I've got a hurt foot. Oh, I've got a neck ache. Oh, I've got a stomach problem. You just show them your Medicare card, away you go. On Medicare Advantage, you do have the PPO or HMO setup where you have a primary care physician. You go to him first or her first. They make a referral to somebody. But it's not bad because, all the doctors are coordinated amongst themselves. I'm a fan of it. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's two different things, and it's a personal decision.
So I guess that's myth one debunked is Medicare ain't free.
Right. Medicare does cost money.
It does cost money. So let's dig a little bit into the timing of enrollment because that's pretty important.
Right. So there are different definitions of enrollment periods. The first one we're going to look at is just your initial enrollment period. And this it's a 7-month window. Starts 3 months before your birthday, the month of your birthday, 3 months after, and then that's at age 65. It's all built around that. And then enrolling that is important because if you don't have coverage through work, you do need to get that Part B right away.
Otherwise, there's some fine print on that, and we're going to get into that fine print after these messages. So stay tuned with us here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris, Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning. Talking about some of the myths of Medicare, doing a little debunking, if you will, on this week's episode of Dollars and Cents. My name, of course, is Joel Garris. Joining me on the program, Rob Field. Rob, before the break, we debunked a myth. Hey, Medicare ain't free.
Right.
It does cost. The Part A is you don't have to pay for, but you've been paying for it pretty much your entire working career because you're throwing money into it. But then it can start to add up pretty quick on a traditional Medicare side with a supplement, all that. Maybe $500 a month. That's not free on a per person basis. And then we were talking a little bit about this timing issue. As opposed to like Social Security, sign up for it anytime between 62 and 70. No big deal if you don't necessarily sign up and hit a particular year or month. But with Medicare, it matters.
Very much so. We talked about that initial enrollment period. That's when you're first available to get just Medicare at age 65. If you're working and you have qualified coverage through work, then you don't have to worry about that until you lose it. But then there are late enrollment penalties and there are special enrollment periods. So, those penalties are going to apply to late enrollment in Part D. You cost you an extra 1% for every month that you don't sign up for it if you thought you were going to need it. Part B, the doctor part, that's $185. If you delay that, and that happens every so often, people think, well, you know what? I'm healthy. I don't want to pay the $185. I'll wait. Well, they'll hit you up with a 10% increase every year that you don't sign up.
That's permanent. That's not like permanent. A 1 year, okay, you're going to have to pay a penalty for the first year.
Right.
That is a permanent increase in the amount of that premium.
Right. And people say, well, I make pretty good money, so I won't worry about signing up. So now you're paying a late penalty on the $185, and IRMA's going to hit you because you're making some money, and it'll come back to haunt you.
Very quickly. So these windows really do matter. That age 65 really matters. And now, granted, if you've got health insurance through your employer, okay, then there's different provisions. But just know that you really got to be paying attention to this. And when that ends, or when that employer coverage ends, well, then you've got to kind of circle back around on this stuff as well.
Immediately. You can't take off a couple of months. It's employer insurance ends, then next month you need to be on Medicare to avoid the penalties.
No, that's exactly right. And I guess that gets us to kind of the other assumption that people sometimes make, Rob, and that's this notion of, well, I'm collecting Social Security or I turned 65. I don't need to do anything. It's just automatic in terms of my enrollment. But that's not the case.
Right. It's not automatic. You at 65, you can get Part A. And then if you need Part B, you've got to go to ssa.gov and sign up for it. And if you wait, then there will be a penalty. So, no, it's not quite automatic.
Well, and the kicker is if you're collecting Social Security, then it does sort of flow. But if you're not collecting Social Security, even the Part A part, you've got to go in and enroll at that point as well. Right,
because we'll see clients and prospects who at age 65 are still happy to be working. And so, that they may have insurance, they may not. So it's important that they get on Medicare if they don't have the appropriate insurance. And it's to their benefit. It's a good program that really will give you some great options.
Well, and I think the other sort of myth that we run into is this notion that people feel so much angst about selecting which plan to be on, right? And believe me, I understand the angst, right? Because when you get to that age, I mean, your mailbox is getting flooded with flyers and seminars, and I mean, it's very overwhelming. But there's some good news here is you don't have to stick with the option that you selected in year one.
No, that's true. Every year you get a chance for the general period in which, it's an annual open enrollment, occurs between October 15th and December 7th. So if you sign up for one type of plan, and just doesn't work out, or you start to do more research and realize there's a better option for you, you can switch every year.
Yeah, no, and obviously that's the enrollment period that we talked about earlier. Starts here in about a month, October 15th, runs to December 7th.
Right.
So Rob, you're on Medicare now. How's that all going? Which option did you pick? You mind sharing that with our listeners?
No, not at all. I qualified for Medicare last year. And so signed up, because no matter where you end up going, you got to start off with regular Medicare. Sign up, go on the website. And then from there, I did my research. I'm fairly healthy, and so the thought of having a primary care physician and having him refer me to other doctors, I like that idea. And the fact that the cost was very, very economical, I took that route. I mean, I just simply thought, it's all the bells and whistles that you get for the 185 are strong. One thing I was going to share was I was going to give you an example of somebody who, if they stayed on regular Medicare and did a supplement, and then maybe they use their supplement as, say, Plan G, which is real popular. We hear a lot about that. So, first of all, their cost. Everybody's going to pay the 185, whether it's Medicare Advantage or regular Medicare. The Part G premium right now is about $155 a month. So then you say, okay, well, I need the drug coverage. If I'm not getting on a Medicare Advantage plan, I got to buy a standalone. That's another $46. And then if you're like, well, I would like to have vision and dental and hearing covered, that's another standalone product that you'd have to buy, another $45. That's about $431 right there. And with standard Medicare, that first year or every year, you got a deductible. So in the first year, you might have that $431. Then have the deductible to $257. Now you're up close to $700 in that year. Whereas on the Medicare Advantage plan, Part A I've already paid for. Part B is $185. I do have an IRMA that's attached to it. Then I got Part D, which is much, much, much less expensive when you have it through Medicare Advantage. So I'm out the door for $250 something, and with it I've got my dental, and I've used it, my hearing, my vision, I got glasses through it, covered completely, and I got a free membership to a gym.
Yeah. So and I've obviously shared this with you, as I've shared it with many folks, kind of in the office. My mom's been on Medicare Advantage for 20 odd years as part of a state retiree, so that has certainly worked out really well. I think bottom line on this one for folks. Rob, really, first of all, it's not free.
Right.
Put a line item in your retirement budget on this one, because there is some cost. Even if you do Medicare Advantage, it's still a couple $100 a month. And then, so make sure that's part of your budget, right? And then the timing on this one matters. Set your calendar, if you will, because you got to apply for it at the right age.
Right. The one thing that's nice, though, if somebody's working and they make it till age 65 and then they retire, they drop one of the biggest costs that affects people in retirement, and that's the medical insurance.
Yeah.
We'll have some clients and prospects who come in, they're like, I've had enough, I'm out of here, I'm age 62, and the first thing we talk to them about, because they don't always realize, is the cost of their outside insurance until they can qualify for Medicare. And then now we're not talking hundreds, we're talking thousands.
Yeah, that cost can add up quite a bit, and then you throw in the IRMA penalty if your income is above a certain level, then you can wind up having it be pretty costly. So make sure you, I guess, don't rely on assumptions and believe some of the myths that are out there involving Medicare. So that's obviously some important takeaways for our listening audience this week. So certainly a full show this week, Rob. Earlier we were, of course, talking through the notion of some of the issues behind divorce. Just to recap some of the key takeaways on that for our listening audience. I guess careful that you don't spend too much, because it can start to get expensive very quickly.
Right. Your takeaways are going to be, think about the cost of the divorce, think about your costs once you're divorced, and then don't let your emotions be the decision maker.
Sure.
You got to keep it kind of businesslike. And then, just keep track of that budget and the kids, and think about what your life's going to look like after the divorce, and make sure that financially you're focused on the correct way to manage that.
And be careful not to spin your wheels and just have that be just a huge bill, particularly in today's world.
Right.
That can really add up. And then I guess earlier in the show, we were talking a little bit about Muni Bonds, conversation that I think many of our listening audience will start to hear more and more of. Bottom line on that is make sure and it all comes back to this, right? Make sure you know what you own. right? Because the maturity on those muni bonds, or whether they are high quality muni bonds or low quality muni bonds, that's going to matter in terms of kind of what the potential risk is on them, because a muni bond fund is, after all, a bond fund, which during periods of rising interest rates, you can lose principal just as quick.
Sure. People are always going to be chasing the product's got the higher yield, so you're going to have to discount the current bond if necessary.
Indeed. So, some key thoughts, I guess, for our listening audience this week, as there is each and every week on the program here on Dollars and Cents. We're going to wrap it on up and get on out of here. Thank you for listening to the program. This, of course, has been Dollars and Cents with your host, Joel Garris, Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning. If you're interested in learning more about who we are during the weekday, go to our website at Nelson Financial Planning. There, you can reach out to us through our Contact Us button and set up an absolutely free conversation at your convenience. Have a great rest of your day.